can stand and walk around if you like, and so on,
Right.
with everything.
Even better. It's sitting, so always seems slightly. Is that you? Can you see me? Okay.
I can everything to, yeah.
You've got a deputy next to you.
Yes.
Okay. So firstly, can I say thank you to Estonian colleagues for inviting me here to speak to you today and to participate in the Nordic Baltic cluster. I found yesterday really, really good, and it was great to have a sauna as well last night, so fantastic. So I'm here today to talk to you about the Rural Innovation Support Service in Scotland. Before I go into detail, I just want to tell you in very general terms what RIS is. So the Rural Innovation Support Service, or RIS, is part of the Scottish Rural Network, but we've contracted that out to a third party, the Soil Association Scotland, and they're part of a consortium of organisations that include SAC Consulting, who are responsible for some of the advisory service in Scotland, SOS, who specialise in farm cooperatives and supply chain collaboration, and a number of others. RIS is funded through technical assistance, so it's funded by both the EU and the Scottish Government, and it costs us about £250,000 a year to operate RIS. I'll go into more detail on that later, but just to give you a sense of where RIS comes from. So the presentation today, I wasn't quite sure what you wanted me to cover, so I've kind of banked on, I'll talk about the context, the origins, where we came from, what we've done, and reflect on some of the things we've learned as we've implemented RIS over the last couple of years. So, the first thing, I guess, 2014-15, the Rural Development Programme contained a section which basically obliged the Scottish Rural Network to provide some kind of brokerage for EIP. So we looked at the text within the Rural Development Programme, and we looked at the fact that there was something in there about promoting innovative approaches. There was also something in there about linking into EIP Agri, and there was also something there about supporting operational groups in some way, shape or form. And the NRN, as part of that, was specifically given the task of promoting opportunities for operational groups and facilitating their animation. We were supposed to also promote and encourage the formation of operational groups and the development of proposals for KITIF, which is the EIP funding stream within the Rural Development Programme. And we were also supposed to be looking at collaboration and cooperation through other measures in the RDP. So quite broad. Actually not very helpful because it didn't give us a sense of what we really needed to do. So nothing was desperately prescribed. So when we were looking at the Innovation Support Service and what brokerage could look like, we asked ourselves a number of questions. What are others doing in Scotland? How do we reinforce the existing actions so there's no point in duplicating effort? Are we the ones that are holding the innovation card within the Rural Development Programme? Could we use innovation to help us to work with others in government to enhance the Rural Development Programme implementation? And at that time I was also concerned that we needed to reach out to Horizon 2020, but we also needed to reach out to wider stakeholders, so quite a lot of work. So what we ended up doing was we absolutely took advantage of all the support that was given to rural networks, or I think they were called EIP networks, back in 2014, 15, 16. So I think there was a seminar in cooperation here in Tallinn. There was an event in Budapest for networks. There were some events in Ghent and in other parts of Belgium to help networks and understand how they could stimulate innovation in RDPs. And that was actually really helpful because it made us realise that there was no one size fits all, and we could actually do something fairly meaningful within the rural network. And at that time, I managed to recruit somebody into the team for 6 months who, by happy coincidence, was also fluent in German. And it was very clear from the early seminars that the Germans and the Austrians were quite far ahead of the rest of us in terms of putting in place innovation support service. So Ruth was sent off to various parts of the continent to have discussions with her counterparts there to understand what was working well, what was working less well in those areas, so we could try and bring that back to Scotland and to help us design the innovation support service.
Or after you.
Sorry?
The questions.
Yeah, sorry. Do you want, you can ask the questions now, or I can finish the presentation.
Okay.
I should have asked that. I'm happy to take questions, but it's probably, I think, given time constraints, if I just go through the write them down. So, having looked at what was happening further afield and also reflected about what was happening in Scotland, I should say before I did the rural network, I was also responsible for LEADER, and before that I was led on food and drink industry policy. So I brought that to bear when I was designing the innovation support service. So what were we thinking of? We really wanted to stimulate effective and enduring collaboration. So this needed to be a long-term intervention that was going to be sustained in terms of shifting culture on innovation and innovation support. We felt we really needed to work through the supply chain, and we needed to add value to the existing efforts being made by public and private sector on supply chain collaboration. We needed to make sure that RIS provided that space for ideas to develop. So very much a bottom-up, very much open space. And we were also realised that actually this doesn't need to be a pipeline for rural development funding. It can be a pipeline for other things. The main thing for us, the main mission for us, was to help businesses to realise the opportunity, develop a concrete plan, and then go off and do whatever it is that they wanted to do as a partnership. So we weren't quite fixed on EIP as the end point, if you like. We also felt that we needed to be open to capturing and exchanging ideas. We needed to continue to learn, to evolve as we went. And we needed to demonstrate that collaborative innovation works. If the one thing we looked at when we were mapping the landscape in Scotland, there was no shortage of support for individual businesses. But when it came to enabling clusters of businesses to come together and work with other partners outside the business arena, there was nothing there. So our Rural Innovation Support Service was plugging a very specific gap in the offering, if you like, from the national initiatives in Scotland. Which is why we ended up with this consortium of organisations running the Innovation Support Service. What I was wanting to do was to bring expertise in brokerage and innovation, which is what the Soil Association brought with their work on innovative farmers. But we also needed to have people from organisations, people with relevant expertise in the subject matter. So knowledgeable in food and drink supply chains, and those and very specific agricultural aspects of food and drink as well. So SAC Consulting, they provide the one-to-many advisory service in Scotland. They also provide food and drink advice under a separate contract. SOS, they're very much about building cooperatives and stimulating cooperation in the supply chain. Scotland Food and Drink are the industry leadership body. They're responsible for leading the industry on implementing their food and drink industry strategy. So they provide strategic leadership. But what those all organisations brought was a very different set of perspectives, expertise and understanding of the food and drink supply chain and the brokerage and innovation scene. So so they were contracted on that basis effectively. and that the Rural Innovation Support Service was launched in early 2018. So, what is RIS? It's a programme designed to meet the needs of land-based businesses in Scotland, so it's very much about helping farmers, essentially, farmers and crofters, to shift their business but working with the rest of the supply chain. We also recognised that RIS needed to be there to help the farmers, to give them the capacity to do what they needed to do, because they really don't have the time. So what RIS does is, if a farmer has an idea, they don't have the time to develop it, we provide a broker who comes in and helps them to get their idea off the ground. And that facilitator brings other farming businesses together and helps the group work through possible solutions and to develop a project plan. And as I said before, that plan can be used to apply for EIP funding, or it can be used for other things, and I'll come into that later. But the whole point of that exercise really is about helping the farmers to think a bit differently about their business and about how they do their business and how they can collaborate with others to enhance their bottom line. So very much of the view that whatever we do here can be picked up by other farmers elsewhere. But we don't just rely on the individual brokers to help these farmers develop their ideas. We have a whole host of organisations who have the capacity and the expertise that they can bring to brokerage activities. This is just a selection. This is a mixture of public and private sector organisations, but fundamentally they are all wanting to grow the food and drink sector. They're all part of an initiative called Make Innovation Happen, which is again a public-private partnership, and that's really geared about helping to transform food and drink businesses. What the Rural Innovation Support Service does is it puts a greater emphasis on the agricultural end of the supply chain, which quite often in food and drink discussions tends to be missing. We tend to separate agriculture from the food and drink supply chain, so the processing, the manufacturing, the retailing, the consumer. So really, really crucial that we're part of that, and that there's a really great group of organisations involved. So how does RIS work? Well, we have the initial stages, the group stages, and the project plan. And as I've said before, the facilitator helps the group figure out what they need to do with it, their idea. And RIS groups can be made up of pretty much anybody, but at the heart of it is the land manager. It's the business or the businesses that are wanting an issue addressed or an idea developed. The broker pulls in other businesses from across the supply chain, pulls in researchers. Researchers are kind of fundamental to a lot of the RIS work, but they also pull in other public sector organisations and professionals from outside the sector. Again, they choose the people they need to choose in order to help develop the idea. And at the initial stages, it's very much about just what is the idea. And what we have within RIS is an expression of interest mechanism. So people submit their ideas to us, and we ask them to fill in a summary that just outlines what that is, and who they've reached out to and what they want from the brokerage activity. And we have a senior management team, including myself, who look at those ideas and consider whether or not we should take them forward, and if we do take them forward, which of the consortium members takes ownership of that brokerage activity. If the idea is good, then we go back to the businesses and we develop a working group around that idea. And number 2's missing. It's dropped off. It wasn't that good anyway. So I have number 2 here, so it's okay. So number 2 was really good. the group working. So the business is part of the risk group. I'll amend the presentation and so that for the purposes of publishing it, you've got the right one. And as I said, this can involve anybody who can potentially help develop the idea. But it's very much about co-design, it's about partnership working. So it's thinking about how does the idea meet the kind of wider ambition of the sector, of Scotland PLC. The group tried to get to the nub of the issue. Sometimes, and I'll flag up a few, sometimes the issues that are raised at the beginning are not necessarily the things that are addressed or developed at the end, because the discussion shifts. Because people realise that actually it might not be the issue they really have, it's something else, or it might not be the idea they have, it's something else. But the group tests the idea and thinks about how they can develop ways forward, and then they begin to map out, flesh out progress, how they're going to take the idea forward. And then, number 3, the final plan. So the broker supports the preparation of a project plan with the partners. So the brokerage, I think this was mentioned in the NRN meeting in Romania last year, the brokerage activity, all the costs associated with the brokerage are covered by risks. So the businesses do not part with any money during this process. So all the costs associated with running that brokerage for however long it takes to turn the idea into a project plan, all those costs are covered by the brokerage. So the businesses the farmers don't need to spend any money on this initiative. But the project plan is the end point for risks. So it should be robust enough to inform an application to EIP through the Rural Development Programme. It could be used by the partnerships to develop the idea themselves without funding from EIP, or indeed it could be used by them without any funding, and they just go away and get on with it. The bottom line is they have a concrete plan that they can go away and take forward. So I was going to give you some numbers, and I hope I get this right. If you're used to the lottery, then this should work. So we've had 78 ideas submitted to us over the last 2 years. 11 of those ideas have turned into concrete plans. 5 of them have been discontinued, cancelled, or not pursued. So, and I think this is really important, people come to us with ideas, we pick up the brokerage, and if it turns out that they're not feasible for whatever reason, that's fine. We just stop the brokerage and move on. It's not failure, I think it's just a recognition that there are very practical reasons for not pursuing something. I'll maybe come on to that a bit later as well. We have over 25 ideas that are currently live insofar as they are being brokered and turned into project plans. We have another 30 that are in the process of being considered, I suppose, and they're at the very early stages of the process. We have 28 different individuals from across the consortium providing brokerage for those groups. So there's 20 experts from SAC, from SOS, and from the Soil Association who are providing brokerage for those groups. So again, that was part of the thinking behind the consortium, was to make sure that they had enough resources within the consortia to provide the appropriate resources that were that could match the idea, support the idea being developed. 247. This is not a lottery number. This is the number of farmers and the farm businesses that have been involved in developing the ideas. So we've had 247 businesses over the last 2 years working with us on developing the ideas. So we've been working with them to develop their ideas. That doesn't include businesses that have attended workshops and events to stimulate ideas. These are the guys these are the number of businesses that are actually involved in the brokerage activity itself. 6 of those ideas have been funded under EIP. And this is I threw this in because I think this is fascinating, and it maybe points to where we might go in the future. 5 cooperatives have been working with us on the ideas as well. So cooperative organisations, clusters of farm businesses who have been developing the ideas with us as well. So that's some stats. These are just an example of some of the projects that have been developed, and I think you've all got brochures, so you'll be able to read about them. So the mobile abattoir one is an interesting one because it started off life as one idea. It then turned into 2 ideas. So there were 2 groups came out of those initial discussions, because they had very different views about how they wanted to take forward work on mobile abattoirs, and it was really because of the different needs of different parts of the country, different groups of farmers. That idea has stalled. I vaguely remember speaking to Fergus, and he said they pulled in an expert from Canada on mobile abattoirs to help the group inform the group's thinking. But I certainly know from previous experience, and I suspect it's an issue across Europe. This is a really difficult issue, and the group really struggled to get to grips with how to make this work. So they've not stopped the group. It's just in abeyance for a while until they figure out what they can do with the ideas that they've generated, and that's okay too. That's fine. If it means that it doesn't run for 6 months or a year, then that's okay. The question, I suppose, is then where does RIS, where does the brokerage come back, engage with these groups and resolve the issues that have been identified. So another good example here, Better Hill Sheep Farms. They thought the issue was about genetics of hill sheep, but it turned out it was really sales and marketing. And I think this is symptomatic of some of the discussions we had with businesses. They were not so concerned when we discussed it and fleshed out the issues. It turned out that it was as much about the softer skills of the businesses than about the issue or idea that they had. So, for example, we had a meeting with 40 farmers in Ayrshire, and we thought they would raise lots of really good ideas about supply chains. What they ended up raising issues about was the fact that they didn't really understand how they could engage with businesses and agencies leading on tourism, and how they could get the skill set to diversify their businesses into tourism, because they didn't know how to run a website, they didn't know how to do this, there were lots of things they didn't know how to do. So when we saw that, we thought, okay, this is not about supply chains, but it raises an important issue. Businesses who want to diversify away from food production, but don't have the skills or the expertise to necessarily or the capacity to develop, to diversify their business. I think that was a game changer for us, because it meant that we then had to think about shifting our activity outside the supply chain. Another project I'll raise, because this could be a climate change thing. It could be just an inherently sensible way of running your business. But organic oilseed rape, it's feed for animals. At the moment, they import organic feed from China, and there was a reluctance. So there was a feeling that they needed to shift the way they did business and not be so reliant on importing from China. Apparently the Swedes produce organic oilseed rape as inputs, and they went to Sweden and had a really good look at what the Swedes were doing, and that reassured the feed processor that this was worth pursuing if they could get a cluster of businesses together to give them the economies of scale to take it forward. So they've produced the project plan. They're now in the process of trialling the crops. So it's a win-win in terms of carbon and climate change, as well as business resilience in an ever-changing world. The next one is if this works.
We're trying to solve the age-old problem. We want better cows, and farmers have been breeding better cows for hundreds of years. Being impatient devils that we are, we want to speed that process up. Traditionally, what we've done is bought the best quality semen we possibly could from the company that we thought delivered the genetics that we require for our system of springbok calving. And then we concentrate on fertility and mating as many cows as possible to that bull semen. The RISC project is quite different. We're going to concentrate on dam improvement. So that's on the cow. We reckon the gains are much, much bigger by improving the cows than simply by bringing in improved bull genetics.
One of the things that we have identified is that we've got a big gap between the poorest performing cow and the best performing cow. So if we can replace the poor performing cows with better performing heifers, then the benefits will be that we'll have a uniform herd that gets in calf, produces the same amount of milk.
So the risk group are trying to rank the cows based on their phenotype production, which will link back into genetic testing of their offspring, and then from that we can select elite cows to produce our replacements from, which we will be using sex semen and potentially IVF to produce embryos to put into surrogate dams. So what we are really trying to do is do a weighted ranking system of the cows for the most productive down to the least productive. So from that we can identify the very best cows for our system and produce the replacements from them from a much smaller number of cows than what we're currently doing.
The RISC group brings all our thinking together into one place by providing us with a facilitator. It helps somebody pull all our conversations together, somebody to organise our diary, somebody to go out and do the work when we're busy farming, to find the individuals or organisations that need to help us. And that's the key thing. It's keeping it focused. It allows for discussion and collaboration.
Often the challenge with getting people to work together is to develop a common purpose so that everybody is really clear about what they want to achieve. And with this group, that came at the very start. I think the challenge will be actually doing what they want to do as quick as they want to achieve it. The wider you can spread the net, the more networks you can gain, the more innovation you can gain, the more expertise you can bring, and you just get there quicker and faster.
So my bit, in terms of quantitative genetics, is to enable the group to identify those animals at the top end of their herd that they would want to breed from, and to identify how many offspring we could expect to get from the top animals. The combination of that effort then tells us whether we can concentrate our effort in the top 10 cows, or the top 20 cows, or the top 50 cows. Once we know that, we can then work out a mechanism by which those top 50 cows, for example, would produce embryos that would go into all the other cows in the herd. And these three farmers have 3,000 cows, so they can put those embryos in the other cows. That will create a generation of calves that are all related to the top 20 or 50 cows. So then my role becomes one of producing a mating program that would keep that progress going over time, but would minimise inbreeding. They had decided to operate their breeding scheme as one nucleus containing about 3,000 cows from 3 separate farms. And that's quite unusual. Farmers are fairly independent normally, and any one of them would be big enough to run their own breeding program. It became clear that they were very committed to making very rapid genetic improvement, and so were amenable to some of the new technologies that would enable them to do that. I'm not aware of other people doing such a thing, and it's really quite interesting to see the speed with which new innovations are now being applied by very innovative farmers, and in this case some dairy farmers with large herds. And that represents a very good example of the way that the national herd is likely to move in the future.
Having people like Hamish and the geneticists on board just keeps everything on track, keeps us really focused, and just makes sure it gets done on time.
it's difficult to get away from the coalface sometimes, and it's also very important for us to not lose sight of the things day to day. So we need to concentrate on getting these cows to calve inside a short window, and if you miss or mix that up, it takes years to recover. So
we have to take responsibility for our own problems and seek the answers out, not wait for somebody to bring them to us. This type of project is what we need to become a thriving, striving industry. We hope to solve a whole lot of problems for the industry as well as for ourselves. If we can make it commercially viable, then it can be copied.
I believe in collaboration, and working with Rory and Graham and firing ideas off each other means that we're actually going to manage to progress this scheme much quicker than we would individually. You know, farms need to be able to make money to reinvest in the environment into their futures as well. And I believe by improving the efficiency of the milk that we produce, our businesses will be much more regenerative in their very nature.
So that gives you a sense of how one of the projects have benefited from the RIS brokerage. And I suppose that also reminds me that communication has been really important over the last few years. We have produced videos, we have social media platform, and we obviously have the brochure there as well. So it's taken a year or so to get the recognition from the sector and from businesses that of the benefits of RIS, and I think it's now beginning to bear fruit. So there are a number of other groups that Glampshire is the tourism the tourism group in Ayrshire who are wanting to diversify their activities. But you can see there's a range of different things. So for example, using wood chip for bedding instead of straw. Sugar beet for bioethanol. Somebody came to us and said, I remember having a discussion, and she said, well, we're going to have to double the amount of bioethanol in our petrol over the next however many years, from 5% to 10%. We currently rely on imports from other parts of Europe and further afield. We need to be more self-sufficient. That means we need to find several thousand hectares of land in order to grow sugar beet that we can turn into bioethanol. Oh, and by the way, we can use the byproduct from that bioethanol process to develop plastics and various other things from the. So it convinced me that this was worth taking forward, and we've now established an innovation risk group on sugar beet for bioethanol. And the last one, blockchain for oats, that got some coverage in the press. So being able to go into a supermarket, scan the QR code and be told all the information about the journey of the oats in that packet. And that's being led by a group of farmers up in the northeast of Scotland. Really, really exciting. But what we're trying to do is to get that range of different projects that cover a host of different issues. And as it says there, there's really no bounds to the work that we can do in the Innovation Support Service. So just some reflections, briefly. When we started on this 2 years ago, we knew that this was new, and we've always felt we needed to reach out to others to help us on the journey. We're founding partners of the UK Farmer-led Innovation Network, so that's trying to bring lots of other organisations similar to RIS together to collaborate, to understand what works well, what works less well. That group involves researchers, industry bodies, as well as innovation support services like ourselves. So we're really working with these guys to try and understand what we can do better, differently. And actually monitoring and evaluation is a big part of that group, as well as understanding the skills that we need in order to facilitate effectively to provide that innovation brokerage. So really interesting network of organisations there. We're linked in with the Horizon 2020 Project Liaison. We're one of the case studies there, so we're getting free evaluation, if you like, research through liaison. We had a meeting with them last week about framing the work they're going to do with us on that case as part of that project. We've also reached out to other Horizon 2020 projects, and luckily they have the number of Scottish partners, so we can engage with the Scottish partners and get a sense of an input to those discussions as well. But what's really important for us is that we're looking outside Scotland, we're looking outside the UK and looking what others are doing and how they're doing it. And I think that's really important. It was important when we set up RIS, and I think it will be important for whatever we do next. And we've also strengthened the links with the EIP funding in Scotland. Now that the policy colleagues can see what RIS is doing, they are now much more amenable to us being the pipeline for EIP projects now that it's tried and tested. So, reflections. We started off with low-hanging fruit. So the consortium organisations had researchers and they had issues that had been sitting there for a long time and hadn't been moving at all. So RIS was a great opportunity for them to pursue some of those things that they were put to one side. I think now that's not the case. Now we're actually having to work much harder on some of those issues that are new, and we're much more reliant now on farmers coming forward and giving their ideas rather than researchers giving us the ideas that they got from the businesses, if that makes sense. So we've had greater recognition and acknowledgement from the farming community, and we are making a difference. We are bringing dormant ideas to life. We are making links through the supply chain. We are progressing ideas, and we're realising possibilities that 2 years ago I don't think would have happened. So in that sense, I think we can say categorically we are unique, we are flexible, we're open, we're tailoring support, and it's about genuine collaboration. If some of those issues fall by the wayside, that's fine, but we shouldn't be afraid to tackle some of the big issues. We're very aware that there's a busy surrounding landscape. There's lots of we had a session as an SMT a few weeks before Christmas, and we were thinking about the overlaps and the common goals with other initiatives, other organisations. Do we have a role? And I think we do. Broadly speaking, we do. If we're operating within that collaboration area, I think we're in pretty safe territory. We've also recognised that we really need to be able to strike the right balance. We're not sure we've got that quite right between brokerage and subject matter expertise. In the innovation support arena, we find ourselves thinking that actually we need to be probably much better at the brokerage than we are at, in the sense the expertise is what it is. If the thrust of RIS and the unique bit about RIS is that brokerage, then maybe that's the thing we need to think about, focus much more on in the next post 2020. So we've taken a lot of time to understand our legacy. How have we made a difference? This year we'll be revisiting some of the completed projects and understanding where they've got to, and understanding how they've attributed what they've done to RIS. So communication will be enhanced over the coming year. We'll also be enhancing our evaluation, and we're very lucky that we've got liaison and others working with us on that. And that's really crucial, I think, in terms of helping us to think about what we do post 2020. And one of the things that we didn't really think about too hard about, I talked about this being an open and bottom-up process. Climate change has kind of shifted that somewhat, because I think the focus from colleagues around us and politicians is climate change is the thing we should be focusing on, everybody should be focusing on. We're going to have a climate change workshop this year, and just to see if we can gather some ideas about that we could take forward, see where that takes us. So I think, come the future, and I got my crystal ball out, and I was thinking, well, I just talked about climate change. I think farm businesses need to be able to both mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change, and they need to do more to enhance biodiversity, as well as working harder to ensure that they're profitable. I think that's going to be the mantra from here on in. The question is, how do you make that work? And in my mind, fostering collaboration and new ways of working is the key. So innovation support could be at the heart of that enabling environment in the next programming period. So for us, the challenge is trying to persuade policy colleagues that rather than continue to give grants to people to do stuff, they really need to also focus their energies on that enabling environment, that supporting environment, because if we can't help farmers transition from A to B, then we are not going to achieve whatever outcomes we envisage over the next 5 or 6 years. So with that in mind, we think there's a role for innovation support as part of an enhanced agriculture, rural knowledge innovation system. So a lot of the landscape we're operating in is not just about innovation brokerage and innovation for its sake. It's also about knowledge transfer and helping businesses to transform through that. And that's where I think there's a lot of scope for enhancing the offering. There's already massive offerings on leadership, peer-to-peer mentoring, etc. Can we make that work as part of the innovation support landscape? And we're going to be hosting a workshop in Scotland in the spring to bring all the Scottish actors together to have that first conversation about how we bring all those disparate strands together and prepare the ground for post 2020. Okay, that's me.
So, some questions. Now, Kostja, you can ask the first question.
I have two short questions. The first one, when you're talking about the agriculture, food and drinks industries, is there any overlap moment? Are there separately acting some other similar service providers in Scotland, or you just acting alone in the food sector as innovation support brokers?
So as I said there, we are unique in terms of the support that's available to businesses. So we're the only ones that are providing support to stimulate collaboration in that sense. But by having those organisations as part of the consortium, we kind of ensure that whatever they're doing kind of fits with what we're doing as well. But as I say, the landscape is so busy. We really did have to think long and hard about what is the added value of the rural development programme over and above what everybody else is doing already, and that's really difficult. And I don't think, and there's no straight answer to that. We just made sure that when we did the preparatory work, and the preparatory work took about 2 years, that we had those conversations with all the different organisations, and so that when we went into that tendering exercise, we were very clear that the proposition was very different to what was being done already.
And the second question, the profile of the innovation brokers, who these people are, former researchers, active advisors, former farmers, or?
So SAC Consulting are active advisors. They're involved in other contracts beyond the advisory service as well. So they have a very specific set of expertise and are on a range of different issues. SOS are professional in supply chain collaboration. They're not researchers. A lot of them come from industry or from public sector. The Soil Association, some of these guys are farmers, are active farmers, but again, they're drawing on their expertise as a UK organisation to provide the brokerage. Okay.
I would like also to exhaust my limit of 2 questions. I will start with the last Konstantin's question. You have this group of innovation brokers. Do you offer, or somebody else offers them also some particular training, or they use their background
So I talked about this tension's maybe not the right word, but that balance between expertise, subject matter expertise, and innovation brokerage expertise. Very early on in the process, in 2018, we provided, or maybe 2017, we provided training for prospective brokers in the organisations to ensure that they understood absolutely what the Innovation Support Service was, how it was different from what was happening already, and to give them the tools they needed to brokerage effectively. We provided training, and we've done that a few times over the last few years. I think the one thing that we're very conscious of is that there's a tendency for people, particularly advisors, to advise. And they think that's brokerage. So they've been doing this for 20 years or so. They're being presented with a different way of working, a different way of thinking, a different way of engaging with business, and I think it's working, but it's something we'll need to think about come post 2020. Is how we make sure that whoever's providing that brokerage understand what that means and have the wherewithal to implement it effectively.
And another question. Let's imagine that we have the group of farmers which have an idea. The REITs is the only pathway how they can get till measure 16.1, or other ways. In fact, without the professional assistance,
they don't need to come through RIS if they don't have to. If they can develop a proposition and put in an application to EIP, they can do so directly.
And the quality of the projects, can you already assess that through the time frame?
I think so. I think the quality of the propositions is maybe perhaps not the issue. The issue is probably more the design and implementation of the scheme. I remember, I think in 2016, I put a paper to policy colleagues leading on implementation of EIP, saying you need to do these things in order to help smooth the path for the pipeline, if you like. They didn't pick that up then. In fact, we got told to go away and do certain things to ourselves. But the point is now they've picked that up again and they've said, oh, right, we'll do this. So, I don't think it's about necessarily the quality of the ideas or the propositions. I think it's much more about the architecture of the relevant schemes. So when we're thinking about EIP and innovation support, we need to look at them in the round and collectively. You cannot, but of course EIP is not the only mechanism in the RDP. So there are other ways of looking at this.
How long time did it take that you felt that farmers have started to trust you?
I think in the last year, I probably since we started doing workshops, and we developed those workshops in partnership with the Farmers Union. So we had a workshop in Ayrshire with 40 people. We then had 2 upland workshops, and they were produced in partnership with the NFUS and the advisory service. So capitalising on the connections and getting farmers right in the room was critical too. But I think it's also because projects have been realised, so the project plans have been prepared. Some of them have been funded, and therefore farmers can see that something is happening. And I think once they see something is happening, they can engage with RIS in maybe a way that they couldn't engage with before. I think also we've probably been much better internally at organising ourselves and pushing the consortium partners to engage more effectively with farmers and to talk about RIS as a potential vehicle to help them resolve their issues or develop their ideas.
Additionally to those
You've had two
workshops-
questions.
Perhaps that's a comment.
One extra,
We will see.
please. Please. Regarding those workshops, were they supposed only for information about your service, or you did gather also some potential?
Yeah, so
ideas?
the purpose of those workshops was to generate ideas by groups of farmers that could be taken forward. So we were not selling the risks when we were, but we were also trying to find ideas. And we chose Upland and Ayrshire in particular because they have those were the groups of farmers that were not necessarily benefiting beforehand, because hill farming is not arable. It's easier for arable farmers to engage in this because they have the wherewithal, but hill farm is a very different beast.
So
How do you handle the question of secrecy? I mean, if you gather farmers and you want to discuss problems and you want to discuss solutions, or you want to get example of solutions, not everyone wants to tell if he has a good idea, he or she has a good idea. He doesn't want to spread it to all the others.
Yeah. Yes, that's an issue, and I guess that's why you have a combination of workshops. We have an EOI platform on the website, and obviously a lot of these farming businesses are already speaking to advisors regularly. So it may be that advisors pick up the intelligence from a business or a number of businesses, and they bring that to the SMT. So there's various ways that businesses can engage with risks. It's not just about they don't need to do it in public fora.
Yeah, because you have to respect if there is
Yes.
something that's possible to commercialize. You
Absolutely,
must respect
absolutely.
That should be
Yes.
secret.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the service is free of charge for the farmers.
Yeah.
But the brokers, are they paid by the RIS, or are they operating through their budgets, or their organization budgets?
All the costs associated with risks, including the costs of providing the brokerage, are provided through risks. So that £250,000 a year basically covers all the brokerage activities. So the costs, the day rates of the facilitators, the brokers, any costs associated with the brokerage activity, it's all covered through risks.
Have you discussed that partly there would be some kind of it would be partly covered by the farmers? So is it some kind of threshold to put the ideas forward? If farmers have to pay something, or should that be some kind of commitment for the process?
I think when we were doing the work before the tender exercise, when we were engaging with people around Europe, my sense was that if farmers had to pay to be involved in this, then it would probably not happen. So we just said, we're providing a service. Let's. I mean, it might be one of the questions that gets raised in evaluation is, should farmers pay something towards the cost of? But to be honest, it's probably cleaner if we don't. We were conscious of red tape and bureaucracy, and having been involved in the LEADER program previously, you could see that if you started to invoice people for different things or make people pay for things, then that just generated a system of bureaucracy that may not be may not be worth doing. So we decided that we would just go ahead and work on the assumption that we would have effectively a budget for each brokerage activity. The brokers would be paid on the basis of day rates for that activity, however long that activity took, and all the costs associated with that activity would be covered through the contract. So a much cleaner, a much easier process than having to deal with money transactions both ways. But I think that's something we might need to consider in the next programming period if budgets are not as generous as they once were.
Please, Ilona.
Yeah, just to first to follow on to that, generally if farmers need to spend time on something, that's also already a commitment. So if they're participating in workshops or sending in ideas, that is something that already shows that they're interested, because otherwise they wouldn't spend the time.
Yeah.
At least that's what I'm hearing back from farmers, that's, and also experiencing in when we organise thematic workshops for operational groups, we're always very keen, so EIP projects, to get the farmers themselves on board. And they do come, but you really have to make an effort, and they really, it does cost them, even if we pay for their travel and accommodation, but it's really something that they wonder if, is it worth it? I remember very clearly we had one of our first thematic workshops was on operational groups working in organic agriculture. And one of the farmers, the weekend before, he already had received his train tickets. He called and he said, you know, I've had a storm and half my herbs have washed away and I'm really not sure if I can come. So I said, well, do you have anyone else in your farm who could join then instead of you? And he said, no, it's just me. So I said, well, I understand, and of course you're very welcome, and we'd like to have you there, but if it's not possible, it's not possible. And then he came, and at the end of the workshop said, I'm really glad I came, because I've been able to speak to so many other farmers, and we went to see a farm, and I reckon that you wouldn't be doing something on organic agriculture that soon again, because you have lots of topics to cover. So yeah, you can really feel that it costs them to come to a workshop, and that you have to do something that makes it worthwhile. So yeah, I think. But yeah, to say, I think the way this RIS is operating is really very much in the spirit of the EIP Agri, because the way that the spirit of the European Innovation Partnership is really to be very open to not just the sort of funding through RDP and through Horizon, but it's about innovation in agriculture and forestry, wherever, to make it more productive and sustainable. So I think the flexibility is amazing, and I think it's really great that you